Lu Yang had never expected to find himself in this situation. The rain was coming down in sheets, hammering the streets and splashing against the dark windows of his worn-out sedan. The hum of his car's engine was a dull companion as he drove through the quiet city. The storm had rolled in earlier that evening, a perfect storm of winds and thunder, threatening to swallow everything in its path. But Lu Yang was too tired to care. He had just finished a grueling shift at the local power plant, overseeing routine maintenance on the city's energy grid. Another night of flickering lights and systems that seemed to have a mind of their own. His mind, too, seemed to drift aimlessly. He pulled off the main road and into a narrow alleyway, hoping to save a few minutes on his way home. The storm had made the streets deserted, and the occasional crack of thunder was the only sound to break the eerie silence of the city. Lu Yang hadn't been prepared for what was about to happen. Not that anyone could have been. As he made his way through the alley, the first bolt of lightning struck the air above him with a deafening crack, lighting up the sky. It wasn't the usual quick flash of a storm. This bolt seemed to linger, almost as if the sky itself were trying to grab him. He barely had time to react. His fingers brushed the metal frame of a streetlight as the lightning shot down from the heavens and into his body. For a split second, there was nothing but searing white-hot pain, and then, nothing. It felt like being plugged directly into the power grid. His whole body hummed, vibrated with energy. He couldn't move, couldn't speak, as if he had become one with the storm itself. His heart raced as his senses surged into overdrive. And then, just as quickly as it had struck, the energy dissipated. The city was dark. The rain still fell, but the alley was now a world of silence, save for the faint buzzing sound that filled his ears. Lu Yang collapsed to his knees, breathing heavily. The pain was gone, replaced by something strange, something he couldn't quite place. The light in the alley flickered for a moment, then completely shut off. He hadn't even realized he was reaching for it, but his fingers sparked, small arcs of electricity crackling from his fingertips. He looked down at his hand, then up at the darkened street. His heart thumped, and in the background, the storm raged on, seemingly mocking his confusion. At first, he thought he was imagining it. Maybe the storm had messed with his head. Maybe he was exhausted, delirious. But when he tried to push himself back up, his hand brushed against a nearby trash can. It was as though the metal had come to life, humming with energy, trembling under his touch. He yanked his hand back. Sparks flew from his fingers, and suddenly, the streetlight overhead flickered again, illuminating the alley for a brief second. It was as if he had awakened something. Something dangerous. Lu Yang stood up, shaking. He staggered backward, his chest heaving as he tried to make sense of what had just happened. Had the lightning really done this? Could he have somehow absorbed it? The thought was absurd, but it didn't stop the tingling sensation in his fingertips. The city felt different. His body felt different. As if every electrical current in the city was connected to him. He tried to steady himself, his breath catching in his throat. "No, this isn't possible," he muttered. "I'm just imagining things. I must be." But then, without warning, the metal frame of the vending machine beside him hummed. It buzzed violently as though responding to his presence, and then, without him even thinking, he raised his hand, and the machine burst into a shower of sparks. The explosion rattled him to his core, and cans of soda flew everywhere. A few hit his chest and bounced harmlessly off the pavement. Lu Yang froze. His body was shaking, but not from the cold. No, this was something else, a rush of power, a surge of energy that he could barely comprehend. He didn't know whether to be terrified or amazed. "Okay, Lu Yang, pull yourself together," he muttered, wiping his face with his sleeve. His head was spinning, his thoughts racing. How was this possible? He was no superhero. He was just an ordinary electrical engineer, a man who spent his days fixing power grids and muttering under his breath about faulty wiring. This wasn't supposed to happen to people like him. He stumbled out of the alley, hoping he could get home and somehow make sense of it all. He wasn't sure what had happened, but something deep down told him it was just the beginning. The days that followed felt like a blur. Lu Yang couldn't stop thinking about the night in the alley. Each time he closed his eyes, he saw the crackling sparks that had shot from his fingertips. Each time he reached out to touch something metallic, he felt the hum of energy running through his body. Something inside him had shifted. His mind was racing with possibilities. What could he do with this? Was this a gift? A curse? He wasn't sure. But as the days passed, he realized he couldn't ignore it. The power surged through him, and he couldn't shut it off, and then came the call that it happened on an otherwise ordinary afternoon. He had just finished a project at the power plant and was heading back to his small apartment when his phone rang. The number was unknown. Lu Yang, a smooth voice on the other end of the line asked. It was calm, authoritative, but there was a strange edge to it. Yes, Lu Yang replied, his voice uncertain. We've been keeping an eye on you, the voice continued, and we think you might be just what we're looking for. Lu Yang frowned. What are you talking about? There was a pause before the voice on the other end replied. I think you'll want to hear us out. We're from the Surge Division. We specialize in people like you. The name hit Lu Yang like a ton of bricks. Surge Division. He'd heard whispers of it in the news, an underground organization tasked with hunting down those with unnatural abilities. Superpowered individuals. But he had never believed those rumors. Now, hearing the voice on the other end of the line, he realized they were real. I don't understand, Lu Yang said, his heart beating faster. What do you want with me? We want you to join us, the voice said simply. Help us find others like you. Lu Yang's mind was spinning. He hadn't even come to terms with his own powers yet, and now he was being asked to join a team that tracked down people like him? What happens if I refuse? Lu Yang asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Let's just say, we wouldn't advise it. But you'll have options. You'll be given a chance to train, learn how to control your abilities, and work with others who share your talents. Lu Yang hesitated. The offer was tempting, his mind raced with the possibilities. If he could control his abilities, maybe he could figure out what had happened to him. Maybe he could get some answers. But deep down, he wasn't sure he trusted these people. Give us an answer by tonight, the voice said before the line clicked dead. Lu Yang stood there for a moment, his fingers crackling with nervous energy. The decision weighed on him. His life would never be the same again. Lu Yang sat still in the dim glow of his apartment, staring at the phone in his hand. The brief, unsettling conversation with the Surge Division representative played over and over in his mind. He had never been one for big decisions, at least, not decisions of this magnitude. A part of him wanted to throw the phone away, to deny it all. Another part was intrigued, curious. He had always been fascinated by the potential of electricity, the way it powered everything around him, but this was something else entirely. His newfound abilities, the power that surged through him, felt like a curse at times, a force he couldn't control. A soft hum filled the silence of the room as the air conditioning flickered back to life. Lu Yang rubbed his temple, trying to concentrate. Could he really join them? Could he really become one of them, the people who hunted others like himself? And if he didn't join them, what would they do to him? A deep breath. He needed answers. And if the Surge Division could provide those answers, perhaps it was worth considering. He hadn't asked for these abilities. But if they were his, he had to understand them. He couldn't keep stumbling around, unsure of what he was capable of. The decision felt inevitable. He picked up his phone again and dialed the number back, feeling his pulse quicken as it rang. The voice on the other end was calm, patient, as though it had been waiting for his call. Lu Yang, the voice said, smooth and confident. I'm glad to hear from you. Tell me what this is about, Lu Yang said, trying to steady his nerves. What exactly is the Surge Division? There was a slight pause before the voice responded. We specialize in locating and managing individuals who possess unique abilities. Abilities like yours. Liu Yang's fingers twitched involuntarily, a crackling energy running through them. He had to keep control. This wasn't a time for hesitation. And what do you want with me? Liu Yang pressed. You said I could work with you. But what does that mean? It means that you're capable of something rare, the voice said, almost amused. And with our help, you can learn to control it. We hunt others who share your powers, and we offer them the same choice we're offering you. You'll become part of a specialized team, tracking down those who can't, or won't, control their abilities. The offer hung in the air. Tracking down others like him? Hunting them, Liu Yang couldn't help but feel a twinge of discomfort. He had no desire to hurt anyone, especially people who were just like him. But at the same time, he couldn't deny the appeal of the power, the control they were offering him. I need time to think about it, Liu Yang finally said, his voice low. I understand. But don't take too long. Time is critical. The line went silent. Liu Yang stared at the phone for a moment, his fingers tingling again, like static building up in the air. When he finally hung up, he leaned back in his chair, trying to make sense of what was happening. He didn't know what was worse, the fact that he now had these abilities, or the fact that a government agency was hunting down people like him. There was no easy answer. All he knew was that he couldn't remain in the dark forever. By the time the evening rolled around, the storm had subsided, but the tension in the air seemed to hang on. Liu Yang didn't get much sleep. The next morning, he called the number back. There was no turning back now. The following week was a blur of disorienting events. Liu Yang found himself in a high-tech facility on the outskirts of the city, where the Surge Division had its headquarters. It was nothing like the small, cramped office he had imagined. Everything was sleek, efficient, and cold. The walls were lined with screens, digital maps, and surveillance footage. The air was thick with the hum of machines and the constant chatter of technicians. It was a world of high security, high stakes, and high expectations. Liu Yang was ushered into a conference room where a man in a sharp suit stood waiting. The man had the air of someone who had seen it all, calculating, unfazed by anything. His name was Wang Jin, the leader of the Surge Division. His reputation was both legendary and terrifying, but Liu Yang knew nothing about him except for the brief description he had been given: ruthless, efficient, and a master of manipulating people. Liu Yang, Wang Jin greeted him without a hint of warmth, his sharp eyes scanning Liu Yang. Welcome. Liu Yang nodded, unsure of what to expect. The room felt smaller under Wang Jin's gaze. We've been monitoring your progress, Wang Jin continued, sitting down and gesturing for Liu Yang to do the same. Your abilities are impressive. But potential is only the beginning. You need training. You need to understand the power you have, and the responsibility that comes with it. Training? Liu Yang echoed. For what? To control it, Wang Jin said. And to use it. You're going to be part of a team, Liu Yang. A team that hunts down others like you, individuals who pose a threat to the stability of this world. People who have lost control or who refuse to conform. You'll be helping us contain them. Liu Yang shifted in his seat, the weight of those words settling on him. He had already begun to feel the pressure of his new abilities, the unpredictability of them. But the idea of hunting others down, people like him, felt wrong. It didn't sit well with him. Why me? Liu Yang asked, trying to hold on to his composure. Why recruit me? Wang Jin's smile was small, calculating. Because you're different. You're adaptable. And you're not yet fully aware of what you're capable of. That's why we need you. To help us capture the others who are out of control. Liu Yang remained silent. He hadn't asked for this life. He didn't even want to be part of their world. But now that he was here, he couldn't walk away so easily. Training was grueling, they didn't sugarcoat anything. The Surge Division had their methods, their routines, and their expectations. Liu Yang spent long hours in a secure training room, surrounded by other candidates, individuals with varying abilities, all of them learning how to harness their powers for the agency's purposes. The methods were extreme. They pushed him to the limits of his abilities, tested him in ways he hadn't thought possible. They taught him how to channel the electricity inside of him, how to focus his power into precise, controlled bursts. But there were other lessons, too. They showed him the faces of people they had captured, people whose abilities had gone unchecked. He saw the damage they had caused, the chaos they had left in their wake. It was hard to ignore the justification, no matter how much he wanted to. They were saving the world, after all. Or so they said, but as the days passed, Liu Yang began to see something else. Something darker. Each mission, each capture, left him feeling more disillusioned. The rogues he helped capture weren't monsters. Most of them were just scared people who had no idea how to control their powers. Some were even trying to live ordinary lives. And the more Liu Yang learned about the Surge Division, the more he realized it wasn't about saving people, it was about power. Control. The people in charge didn't care about the rogue electrics. They saw them as tools to be used and discarded. It was during one of these missions that Liu Yang's doubts crystallized. The rogue was a woman named Zhao Ling. She had been a scientist, a former member of the Surge Division who had fled when she learned the truth about their experiments. They said she was dangerous. A loose cannon. Someone who had lost control of her abilities. But when Liu Yang tracked her down to an abandoned lab on the outskirts of the city, he found something different. She was calm, collected. Not a criminal, but a person desperate to escape the very people Liu Yang was working for. Why are you doing this? Zhao Ling asked, her voice soft but firm as Liu Yang cornered her in the lab. You're just like me. Don't you see? They're using you. They're using all of us. Liu Yang hesitated. Her words hit home. He had felt the cracks forming in his belief, but this was different. He was standing in front of someone who had been just like him, someone who had been trained by the Surge Division, only to escape when she realized the truth. Let me go, Zhao Ling said, her eyes locked on his, filled with a mixture of fear and hope. Help me. Help us all. Liu Yang's heart raced as he struggled with the decision. The Surge Division had been his lifeline, the organization that promised to give him control. But now, he saw it for what it really was, a machine, designed to hunt and control. Without thinking, he acted. He raised his hand, and a surge of electricity shot through the lab, disabling the tracking devices and alarms. Zhao Ling stood still, disbelief in her eyes. She had expected him to follow orders, to capture her. But Liu Yang had made his choice. Go, he said, his voice low but firm. Run. And just like that, she was gone. The consequences were immediate. Back at the division's headquarters, Liu Yang was summoned. His betrayal had been noticed. They knew he had helped Zhao Ling escape. And they weren't pleased. Liu Yang, Wang Jin's voice was cold, his eyes hard. You've made a grave mistake. You've chosen the wrong side. I don't think I have, Liu Yang said quietly, his fingers crackling with power. I'm done being your hunter. Wang Jin's gaze sharpened. You'll regret this. You're one of us now, Liu Yang. And we always get what we want. But Liu Yang had made his decision. He wasn't going to be a puppet any longer. The hunt had begun, but this time, Liu Yang was the one being hunted. The tension in the air seemed to tighten with each passing hour. Liu Yang could feel the weight of his decision pressing down on him as he moved quickly through the dimly lit streets of the city. The storm that had begun days ago had long passed, but the oppressive atmosphere seemed to linger, as if the world was holding its breath, waiting for something to break. It had been just hours since he betrayed the Surge Division, and already he could feel the eyes of the organization closing in. Every step he took felt heavier, every noise sharper, and his thoughts raced, his mind scrambling to make sense of everything that had happened. Zhao Ling had run, disappearing into the shadows, but she wasn't the only one Lu Yang had to find. There were others like her, others who had once been part of the Surge Division, who had learned the truth about the organization's true agenda. Some had escaped, some had been silenced. But Lu Yang couldn't stop thinking about what she had said. They're using you. They're using all of us. Was she right? Was the Surge Division nothing more than a machine designed to control people like him? He wasn't sure. He didn't have all the answers. But there was one thing he was certain of: he couldn't go back. He had made his choice. And now he had to deal with the consequences. The city seemed different now, the streets darker, the air thicker. The more he walked, the more he felt like he was being watched. It wasn't just paranoia, it was instinct. He had learned to trust his instincts, especially now, when his powers were still so new and unpredictable. A small static charge pulsed in his fingertips, a reminder of the power coursing through him, the electric force he could barely contain. He had to keep moving. He had to find Zhao Ling. His phone buzzed in his pocket, and Lu Yang froze, eyes scanning the shadows. The buzzing felt like an electric pulse in the air, setting his nerves on edge. He pulled the phone out and checked the screen. A text message from an unknown number. "You've made a mistake, Lu Yang. You can't escape. We'll find you." His pulse quickened, but he didn't waste time responding. Instead, he stuffed the phone back into his pocket and turned down a narrow alley, hoping to throw off any surveillance. His heart was pounding in his chest, and the buzzing feeling in his fingertips was growing stronger, like a storm waiting to strike. The message was a warning, but Lu Yang wasn't ready to surrender. Not now. Not when he had finally broken free of the division's grasp. His mind raced as he darted through the streets, searching for an escape route, a place to hide. The familiar cityscape was beginning to feel foreign, like a maze that could close in at any moment. He needed to find Zhao Ling. He needed to find others like him. People who had been wronged, people who could help him expose the truth. They could not stay hidden for long. The division's reach was too vast, and Lu Yang knew it. But there was another problem: Lu Yang wasn't the only one with powers. The Surge Division had its own assets, its own hunters, people with abilities far more refined than his. Lu Yang wasn't sure how many of them had already been sent after him, but he didn't have the luxury of time. As he slipped through the city, the hum of energy in the air grew stronger. He was drawing attention. He could feel it. His every step, every spark that flew from his fingertips, was a beacon for anyone who knew what to look for. He couldn't stop it. Not yet. The chase had begun. Lu Yang found a safe place in an old warehouse near the edge of the city. It was dark and abandoned, filled with the smell of rust and stale air. It wasn't much, but it would do for now. He slumped against the wall, trying to catch his breath. His hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the strange energy that pulsed through him. Every nerve in his body seemed to be vibrating with it. The longer he stayed still, the more the power surged. It wasn't just electrical anymore. It was something else, something primal, as if the storm inside him was building, getting stronger with each passing moment. He clenched his fists, trying to focus, trying to suppress the feeling before it consumed him. He could feel the hum in the back of his throat, the electricity licking at the edges of his consciousness. "Control it," he muttered to himself, his voice low and strained. "You can control it." But the harder he tried to control the surge, the more his power seemed to slip out of his grasp. The hum grew louder. His fingers sparked, and a jolt of electricity shot through the air, sizzling as it hit the metal walls of the warehouse. Lu Yang recoiled, startled. This wasn't just fear. This wasn't just power. This was something deeper, something he couldn't understand. A sound broke through the chaos in his mind, a footstep, soft but deliberate. Lu Yang's head snapped to the side. Someone was here. Before he could react, the shadows in the far corner of the warehouse shifted. A figure stepped into the dim light, a woman with short-cropped hair and an aura of calm power. Zhao Ling Lu Yang didn't speak at first. The relief flooded over him like a wave. He had found her. "I didn't think you'd come," Zhao Ling said, her voice steady, though there was a hint of something in her eyes, something that told Lu Yang she didn't trust him completely, not yet. But that was understandable. After all, he had been sent to capture her not long ago. "I couldn't leave you out there," Lu Yang replied, his voice tight. "They're after me now. They'll come after you again. I won't let them take you." Zhao Ling studied him for a long moment, her eyes scanning him, as if searching for something deeper. Finally, she nodded. "I don't know if we can outrun them. But together, maybe we can stop them. Maybe we can expose the truth." Lu Yang felt a flicker of hope. He had never been a fighter, not in the traditional sense. But now, with these powers, he felt something inside him awakening. A sense of purpose. The Surge Division had been lying to him. They had lied to everyone. They weren't protecting anyone. They were controlling everyone. "I don't know where to start," Lu Yang admitted, his voice almost a whisper. "We start by finding the others," Zhao Ling said. "We need to bring them together. They can't keep hunting us forever. Eventually, they'll slip up. And when they do, we'll make sure the world knows who they really are." Lu Yang nodded, determination hardening in his chest. This was his chance to make things right, to stop the people who had taken everything from him, who had lied to him. He wasn't just going to escape anymore. He was going to fight. It wasn't long before the Surge Division's hunters found them. Lu Yang had barely begun to process everything when the first strike came, a wave of shock troops, armed with tech that could block his electrical powers, coming down on the warehouse with deadly precision. The sound of boots echoed against the concrete as Lu Yang and Zhao Ling barely managed to evade the first wave of their attackers, but Lu Yang wasn't going to run anymore. As the first hunter rounded the corner, Lu Yang's hands shot up instinctively. Sparks flew from his fingertips, and with a grunt, he directed the electricity at the wall in front of him, the surge blasting through the concrete, sending the hunter flying backward. Zhao Ling was already on the move, darting across the room to take cover, moving like a shadow in the chaos. She had her own powers, but Lu Yang knew he couldn't rely on them forever. The Surge Division had grown too powerful. They wouldn't stop until they had him, and her. "We need to get to the others," Lu Yang shouted over the din, his voice harsh with adrenaline. "Agreed," Zhao Ling called back, her eyes sharp. "This is only the beginning. But we can't stop now. We won't stop." The battle raged through the night. Lu Yang fought harder than he ever had before. His powers were wild, uncontrolled, but with each strike, each burst of electricity, he felt a surge of clarity. The more he fought, the more he realized how far he had come. He wasn't just hunting anymore. He was protecting. He was fighting for something bigger. The Surge Division had underestimated him. And now, they would regret it. When the dust finally settled and the last of the hunters was taken down, Lu Yang stood in the ruined warehouse, breathing heavily, his body trembling from exhaustion. His hands were still crackling with power, but he was no longer afraid of it. Zhao Ling stood beside him, her expression grim but resolute. "We've won this round. But there's still a long way to go." Lu Yang nodded, a determined look in his eyes. "Then we'll keep fighting. Until it's over." He knew now that he was no longer a pawn in someone else's game. He was the one making the rules. And as long as he had this power, he would use it to fight for those who couldn't. The Surge Division had created a monster. But that monster was no longer under their control. The war was just beginning. And Lu Yang was ready for it.